Boy, isn't summertime great? You do just about anything you can to get out anytime you can when it's summer. I'm going to give you 4 good keys to a diet for endurance. And then that's for chapter 10. And for chapter 11, I want to just point out 4 things that really have to do with, that are important things you ought to notice about diet and disease. On page 372, you might notice that there are tremendous benefits to fitness. As a matter of fact, they list about 15. And you get the idea that, well, if I'm fit, there are so many health benefits to it that how can I actually turn that down? Here's 4 things for a diet for endurance. 1 is eat breakfast. Tufts University in Boston did a study, huge number of women in this study, and they looked at those who ate breakfast versus those who did not. Now you might think that eating breakfast would give you more calories, but the truth is, when they ate breakfast, they had less problems with weight control, and they were more alert during classes. I mean, if you don't eat breakfast, when you go into class, you're sleepy, you're a starving animal. That's not a good way. So, tip 1, eat breakfast. 2nd, cut fat and cut simple sugars. And actually, you can cut protein. You're probably, even athletes that are trying to build up, might be overloading with protein. You can get that from simple schedules that show what you need. Increase your complex carbs. So you cut fat, simple sugars, increase your complex carbs. Now, the reason you do this is because actually having a high degree of complex carbohydrates gives you a high amount of energy. Now, on page 381, you notice a study that was done with a large number of athletes, and they had a high fat diet, a high protein diet, and a high carbohydrate diet. And they looked at the, endurance effect. And actually the high fat diet, the endurance was only 57 minutes. And when you got to the high carbohydrate diet, it's 167 minutes. It's more than 3 times as long. Now that was done with Bergamo, and it was done in 1967. And that study has not been changed. It's not been modified. The high carbohydrate diet is used by the National Hockey League. It's used by the NFL. I know those 2 for sure. And I know many Olympic athletes use it. So, cut fat, increase carbohydrate. 3rd, load carbohydrates to increase glycogen. Now, that 3rd thing, the loading carbohydrates, most people will talk about having a high carbohydrate meal all along, and you train and then you reduce your training. That's not nearly as important as what I'm going to give you. That is, when you've actually completed a really hard training episode, or you've actually played a big game, within 2 hours, have a high carbohydrate, low fat meal. Now the reason for this is simple. Your muscles are trying to replace those energy stores. And if you feed them, pepperoni pizza, lots of fat in it, the muscles will replace that with fat. I mean, it's an energy store. It's a good energy store. If you have carbohydrate and low fat, the muscles will replace with glycogen. Very well-known study used by Olympic swimming competition. Here's a cool way to do it. It's cheap. It's Kroger's Light, low-fat yogurt, and it has fruit on the bottom. And this stuff is so well preserved. I mean, you can throw these in an athletic sack. You can keep 2 or 3 of these, and they're wonderful as energy replacement. And you do that, again, preferably within an hour following the heavy training. because you've depleted the energy stores. Now, how about when do you exercise? What's going on? There are really two ways we get energy. And one is through the carbohydrate burning. That's the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle. And the second is through burning of fat. That's done by beta oxidation of fat. Completely different set of enzymes. So what's happening here? When we store up carbohydrate in our muscles through training and through dieting, so store it up as glycogen, and of course you've got a lot of fat around all the time. There is this effect known as hitting the wall. Marathoners will tell you at about 5 miles out, they run out of energy. And that's because they burned all the carbohydrate, all the glycogen that's available. And they have to convert over from burning glycogen to burning fat. Well, fat is burned slowly. Fat is burned, but you have plenty of it on board. It continues to burn. When you think about it, if you've ever engaged in a contest where you've really been involved in a dash or some event where at the finish line you're so totally worn down that you almost pass out, you collapse for lack of energy. And actually, if you collapse for total lack of energy, your heart wouldn't have had the energy to beat. But your heart keeps beating in spite of the fact that you've depleted your energy stores. That's because the heart beats on a fat metabolism. Heartbeat is done with beta oxidation. The heart has the fat that's there, and it can continue to beat, and it continue to supply itself with energy. Bicycle racers, they'll go about 5-7 miles in an event. Again, they're out of energy, they hit the wall. About a third of any athletic event, high intensity from players when they're doing it, about a third the way through the contest, it's like, I've got to have some rest. I've got to, replenish my, I'll drink something that's got high carbs in it. What you need to do is to train yourself to burn fat. It is a known fact that you burn more fat at 60% of maximal exertion than you do at 90%. At 90% of maximal exertion, you're feeling pain due to lactic acid accumulation. You've actually burned all the carbohydrate that you're going to burn. At 60%, fat oxidation kicks in. If you watch a marathoner who's trained, they just seem to go on like a machine, like the way the heart beats. They're burning fat. They're not burning carbohydrate. You can't carry enough carbohydrate to take your body whole 22 miles of the marathon. Okay, so you're going to burn more fat. You're going to train yourself. Do some of your training at the 60% level. Back off. Give yourself a break. Don't try and train for maximal strength and endurance. Just back off so that you can actually learn to teach those beta oxidation enzymes to do their job. All right, now, what about the disease? It's in chapter 11. On page 412, there's a map that shows places that have high rate of heart disease. And unfortunately, the Mid-South is one of the worst areas in the whole United States. Now, this is corrected per capita. So the fact that there's not as many people out in the western states, it's still corrected for population. What happens is those people, they're ranchers, they're farmers, they're active, they're out working, and they have a lower rate of heart disease. Okay, so what we need to, and if you look, there are places on both coasts and through the midsection of the country, cities where there's a high rate of physical activity. Like San Francisco is one of them, and Cupertino, California, where the Silicon Valley is. High rate of physical activity, and as a result, the amount of heart disease they suffer is much lower. On page 432, there's a thing called the caloric effect. Restriction of calories is associated with low rate of cancer. And actually, restriction of calories is associated with longevity as well. So look at that caloric effect and recognize there are things with the type of diet we've been recommending all along, which are many preventive measures that will prevent you from getting cancer. And you'll feel better, but you have to include physical activity. And last, on page 437, there is the DASH diet. It's a recommended diet from the USDA. It gives you pretty much the kind of things we've been recommending, but reading about the DASH diet is really good. I want to comment one last thing on steroid abuse, because so many athletes are under pressure to use steroids. Lyle Alzado was 4-time NFL strongman. He won all kinds of awards in the NFL, and this guy was marvelously physically trained, but he abused steroids. And within 3 years after he won his last NFL Strongman Award, Lyle Alzado died of liver cancer, which was clearly induced by the steroids that he was abusing. As a matter of fact, if you Google the Lyle Alzado, A-L-Z-E-D-O Foundation, you will find they are really working to prevent young athletes from getting involved in this. When you buy steroids through a magazine, you don't know whether they're made in Cuba or communist China. You don't know where those things are coming from. Hey, it's summertime. Get out and enjoy it.